Hey, what's going on, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the Alec Walt Show. I'm your host, Alec Walt, alongside another very special guest, and today we're talking about the NBA playoffs. The NBA playoffs begins this weekend, and one of the surprise teams in the NBA last year was the Miami Heat. They entered this year as the 6th seed. Could they make an upset again this year? We'll talk about it all right now on Down the Block Sports. Joining me to discuss all things Miami Heat is Kyle Russo, the co-host of Buckets on JDF Sports and Review and Preview Sports. What's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. This has been a long time coming. We've been texting back and forth, and it finally happened. Got me on a segment that I'm an expert on, man. Happy to be here.
Hell yeah, man. Let's go. I'm happy to have you on. So it was weird. The beginning of the season, the Heat didn't look too great. They were 22-24 on March 26th. Today, they're 40-32, the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, winning 12 of their last 16 games. What has really been the turnaround point here for the Heat this season?
The turnaround point, Alec, has just been health. I'll straight out, flat out say this, that the Miami Heat have probably been the best, most inconsistent team in the NBA, is where they had so many there was a chart that got put out in terms of teams that have been affected by COVID. And in terms of days out due to COVID-19, the Miami Heat were ranked number 4 with, I believe, 95 to 100 days out players due to COVID-19. They were ranked 4th in the NBA. I think your Boston Celtics were actually number 1.
They were up there.
They were up there, but the Miami Heat were ranked 4 between Jimmy Butler being out, Tyler Hero dealing with some stuff. I think Dragic or Nunn might have been out at one point as well. They suffered a lot of that stuff, luck of the draw, and they were just one of those unfortunate teams. That's why I think they're at the place that they're at. Because Alec, and this isn't biased when I say this, the Miami Heat are not a bad team. Yes, in a deep Eastern Conference, where you got the likes of the Brooklyn Nets, Philadelphia 76ers, Milwaukee, the Knicks, who've been a nice surprise, Atlanta. The Miami Heat aren't a bad team. They're not a 6th place team. They're right there, 3 and 4 interchangeable with the Bucks or the Knicks right now. And I actually looked this up because this was an interesting stat line. I've been wanting to do it all season long, but I wanted to wait till the season was over so I could have a complete rundown of what the actual outcome was. So Jimmy Butler this season appeared in 54 games. And this was a guy who I just spoke about, suffered injuries, dealt with COVID, was out for a while. And obviously, maybe outside of Bam Adebayo, arguably this is the best player that they have. And of course, when your best player is out, Alec, you're going to be a lessened team. We see that with all across the league in sports. But let me tell you this. When Jimmy Butler is on the court, the Miami Heat are 33-19. That comes out to when he's on the court, they win almost 64% of their games. When he's not on the court, they're 7-13 and win 35%. That's almost a 30% margin, a 30% margin in terms of wins. And I did the calculations. If Jimmy Butler plays in those games, the Miami Heat are the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference right now. That's how much better they are with him on the court versus him off the court. That's how important and influential he is and impactful when he plays on the court. But that's an obvious. But just based on the fact that the time that he missed, that's the reasoning, we talked about. You brought up why have they been this team? What is the reasoning behind this? They've been missing their star pretty much all year round, or at least when it counted the most, when the Eastern Conference at the top, at least, is so deep.
So for my Milwaukee Bucks team that lost to the Heat in the playoffs last year, hearing those numbers with Jimmy Butler healthy, this seems like the last team they want to play in the first round.
Yeah, of course. Listen, there was a report that came out, I think as the season was coming to a close, that there was a Milwaukee reporter or something along those lines who leaked information basically saying, this is the last team that the Bucks wanted to face. Because they match up nicely pretty much against any other team. You'd probably pick them as the favorite against any other team. Miami, especially with the stigma of what happened last year in the bubble, just absolutely torched them. In fact, a 5-game series, and the only game in which Milwaukee won was the game in which they didn't even have their star, Alec, in the playoffs last year, to be honest. That was the only game they won because Bam and Eric Spoelstra created a game plan, created a defense in which only they, at least as far as I'm concerned, figured out a plan to stop Giannis from feeding in the paint. And that was it. The game was essentially over at that point because outside of Chris Middleton, who could you be dependent upon on the offensive side of the ball for the Bucks? You weren't going to Brook Lopez as your 2. You sure as hell wasn't going to Eric Bledsoe as your 2. Because we know that was part of the reason why they shipped him off to New Orleans for Drew Holiday, to not only improve upon the defensive aspect, but to improve upon the offensive aspect as well. And that's why you look at this series now, we transition almost a year later to this series now. It's so highly anticipated because it's not even Giannis that's the X factor in this series. It's Drew Holiday.
Yeah.
That to me will be the reason why Milwaukee wins this series, is because of Drew Holiday. That gives them the fighting chance, in my personal opinion.
Well, he's going to have to play well because look, I found this statistic earlier today. In the 3 games Giannis played against the Heat this year, he averaged 16.7 points per game and 9.3 rebounds per game. Those are significantly lower than his season averages. You guys are one of the teams that gives Giannis some of the biggest fits. I mean, he's going to have to rely on guys like Drew Holiday to step up. He's going to have to rely on guys like Chris Middleton to step up because I don't know what you guys do, and you can answer this question, but the Giannis we see throughout the regular season is not the Giannis we see when we play the Miami Heat. You guys held him to 3 field goals at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Something that we did a lot last year in the playoffs, Alec, is that Eric Spoelstra just straight up played zone. And you forced Giannis to, obviously easier said than done. You got to credit the talent that Bam Adebayo has flourished into, and Jimmy Butler and all those other guys in the bubble last year and this year as well. You got to credit that talent, but just the defense in which they played, the one-on-one zone type of matchup, Bam Adebayo ultimately stopped the MVP of the league and was the only guy in the league that was able to do so. And now you look at this year, Alec, you brought up the 3 games that they played each other this year. The Bucks won, I think it was 3 times. I think they went 2-1. The Miami Heat won one of those games. The Bucks won 2 of those games. Another fun fact for you here. In all 3 of those games, Jimmy Butler didn't play.
I noticed that. That's what I find unbelievable because now you guys have an additional wing force, someone who's not afraid to, punch him in the mouth, quote unquote. Yeah. And for a team that likes to switch defensively, for a team that's long, physical, versatile, and plays well on that side of the court, now one of your best, most versatile, strong defenders is back for the Heat.
Yeah.
Complete game changer right there for the Heat. Absolutely unbelievable.
It's an absolute game changer, and it's a reason why, it's so hard to evaluate what the Bucks will be able to accomplish in this series because it's almost as if they're doubting themselves, Alec, before the series has even started. Like rumors coming out along those lines that the Bucks, this is the last team they want to face in the first round, which I don't think. I mean, listen, not only for the Bucks, I think a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference don't want to match up against Miami because, again, like I said before, I don't think, even though Miami is the 6th seed, I don't think people really denounce them or deem them as a 6th seed type of team. It's just based on the fact of all the injuries, all the COVID stints in which they had, that they're as low as they are. Otherwise, like I said, they would have been right up there with the top 3 and 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. But on top of the fact, you're getting Jimmy Butler back, like you said. It's ultimately, they have a game plan to stop Giannis. And the Bucks, another rumor that's already being talked about, is that if they don't win this season, Budenholzer's gone. That's how impactful. We have a show over on Review and Preview. It's called the 3&D by Paul Lombardi. He did a show Monday night about it, and I commented in the chat. They were talking about it. And this isn't me being a biased Heat fan. This is me just being a straight-up basketball fan. This series is the most important series yet that Giannis has in his career. This is the most important series that he's had in his career so far. Because what this series means, Giannis signed the Supermax, right? He didn't want to wait. He didn't want to wait till the end of the year. He's committed the next 5 years of his life. Yes, he'll still be young by the time that contract is over. But this is really arguably, his prime. This is when he's winning MVPs. This is when he's competing. This is when he's being athletically dominant, and nobody can match him, basically. This team is so stricken cap-wise that ultimately between Middleton being signed long-term, between Holiday being signed long-term, between all the money they got tied up in an older, aging Brook Lopez and now Giannis Antetokounmpo, there's no way money-wise in which they could really improve as a team. That's why I feel that this series is so important. Because I'll straight up say this as well, is that the Miami Heat, I think, are a great team. I think they put fear in the Bucks. I think that they are a matchup nightmare for them. Other teams like Brooklyn, other teams like Philadelphia, I think they would have favored, maybe not in the first round, but favored because they match up better. But I'll say this straight out. The Miami Heat are not a better team than the Brooklyn Nets. And they're not a team that's better than the Philadelphia 76ers, I don't think, in a 7-game series. So if you're not beating this team right now, and there's no way money-wise and player-wise, on top of the fact, another thing to bring up, Alec, as well, they have no draft capital. They have traded all of their first-round picks basically the next 6 years. So between having no money tied up into contracts and players, having no draft capital, how is this team improving? The answer is there's no way to. So if they can't beat this team in the first round, they're I don't know what they're going to do because there's no way for them to really improve. There's really no way.
Yeah, well, if one player steps up on the Heat, it's going to be really difficult for the Bucks. I mean, we talked about, Tyler Hero was a guy that balled out last year in the postseason, stepped back a little bit, saw it a little bit after the All-Star break, but he has played pretty well the last couple of games. What can we expect out of Tyler Hero? Because I think he is an absolute game changer for this offense if he's knocking down threes.
I think he's a big time moment type of player. That's what he's established himself of, that he's not afraid of the moment. And when you look at rookies and when you look at guys coming to the league, Alec, especially guys that aren't drafted high, you got to remember this was a middle of the first round type of guy. I think he went 13th or 14th overall to the Heat.
Just before the Celtics.
Just before the Celtics. Hey, listen, I'll straight out say this. When the Heat drafted Tyler Hero, not that I was upset, but I was a fan favorite of Romeo Langford, who you guys got. I don't know how that's panned out necessarily, but that was the guy that I advocated for. But Tyler Hero has panned out fantastically with this Miami Heat culture, toughness, grit, and just elimination of the total fear factor. You don't see that in guys, especially in year one for a middle of the first round talent. And this was from day one, Alec, that guys like Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, who has been in the league forever now, straight out said, Tyler's my guy. I've taken him under my wing. This is a guy that works in the gym with me every single day, and you see that on the court, and you see that translate into wins. You see that translate into shots made. You've seen that translate into actual improvement upon player growth. The guy's 20 years old. He was there was a stat line in the bubble last year. He was the youngest player ever in the NBA Finals at 19 years old, and this is what this guy was doing. He was winning games in big moment playoff series. He's a big moment type of guy, and that's what I expect out of him in this Milwaukee series because he's set that bar so high. Just like you said, he's regressed a little bit, but that's another guy, Alec, as well. He played 52 or 54 games this season, so he's missed his time with injury and COVID stint as well. You give him more consistent time, you allow him to get his legs back underneath him. I expect the same type of progression that we saw in year one and year two.
Well, looking at the rest of your backcourt there, Kendrick Nunn's played awesome here in the last month and a half or so. You also have Goran Dragic, who averaged nearly in 20 and 5 last year in your postseason run. If you're Eric Spoelstra, how are you distributing the minutes there at point guard?
It becomes really tough because we talked about Tyler Hero regressing this year a little bit. Goran Dragic with age, he's regressed a little bit as well. He's a guy that in the regular season last year, I believe he averaged around 18 points a game. This season, he's dropped down all the way to around 13. So he's not, again, playoffs is a different animal. For a lot of players, it's your bread and butter type of thing where, you make your money in the playoffs kind of thing, where that's your star moment. That's when you show up. And for Goran, not that he was never a good player with the Heat, he's always been a great player, good, consistent player. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the elevation of his game, it's never been higher than in that playoff moment for Goran Dragic, at least as far as I'm concerned, with the Miami Heat. In terms of veteran experience and what we've seen, at least from what I've seen from Eric Spoelstra, is that they've worked Goran Dragic more as a six-man. Because if you look at the average minutes per game, Nunn has actually played more minutes. He averages around 30, Goran around 26, 27 minutes per game. So I expect that Nunn will start. I expect Dragic to come off the bench. But in terms of distribution of minutes, considering that they're both pretty much at the same standpoint in terms of scoring ability, shot ability, and just time on the court, I expect it to be evenly distributed, maybe a little more in favor of Kendrick Nunn.
So we've talked a lot about some of your depth pieces recently right here. If the Miami Heat are going to win this series against the Milwaukee Bucks, who is one key depth piece that needs to have a phenomenal series?
For me, it's got to be Duncan Robinson. You could shoot with the obvious, and you go to Tyler Hero, you go to Jimmy Butler, you go to Bam Adebayo. That's the obvious pick, but what's the fun in that? It's got to be Duncan Robinson. Why? Because Duncan Robinson is a guy that'll either be 7 of 10 from the three-point line at one night, or he'll be 2 for 11 from the three-point line one night. The inconsistencies that he's had, while the numbers may be a little confusing, to be quite honest with you, you see he's a 40% three-point shooter. Me being a Heat fan, watched very closely this season, is that more often than not, there are definitely great games, but there are a lot of bad ones. And knowing that he's such I don't like to use the word specialist, but that's his forte, is three-point shooting, and that's pretty much his game, is that it almost becomes, in a sense, and I don't like to use this word either, wasted minutes, but time that is not well spent. If he's playing 20 minutes on the court and he's not giving you 5 3-pointers in that 20 minutes or however much time he's getting playing-wise, then that's bad, because those are shots that need to fall down for this Heat team. They're a team that's not only regressed due to injury, but in the beginning of the season, Alec, I wanted the Heat to further improve upon that three-point shooting, which was also good last year. I believe they finished 4th or 2nd in terms of three-point shooting in the league. They regressed all the way back to like 26th in the league in terms of three-point shooting. The drop-off of what they went and essentially not losing any of their shooters has been tremendous. And it's because of guys like Tyler Hero regressing from the three-point line, because Duncan, in which I'm implying, while 40% is great, he's had a lot of those nights where he's shooting really bad from the three-point line versus shooting consistently from the three-point line. In order to win, you got to hit those beyond the perimeter shots. The Miami Heat, you could win in the paint. You could win in the paint. You could beat them in the mid-range, but you got to beat them at the three-point line. That is so key, considering how many threes they take per game, that if they're not falling, I don't really see them winning that game.
So, Kyle, with Jimmy Butler in the lineup, with some of your guys playing healthy, playing well to end this season, what's your prediction here on the series, and how many games do you think it's going to be?
I think it's without a doubt it's going to be 7 games. Like I said in the beginning, for me personally, and this is coming from a Heat fan, and where I should be biased, I'm not, because I'm a realist but yet an optimist at the same time, is that there is no reason really why the Bucks should not win this series. Because I think that last year, and we saw it straight out, their weaknesses. Yes, you were able to stop Giannis, but what made them so vulnerable is that Giannis, while Chris Middleton is a great player, he didn't have a go-to guy. Like, Chris Middleton is another guy who's a good basketball player, but also like a three-point shooter specialist type of guy. And if his shots aren't falling, you could just write the game off and pin it in as a loss. Now Giannis has a versatile wing type of guy, shooter, great two-way player in Jrue Holiday, who you could bank on the fact he could drop 20 and play great defense on the opponent. That's something that I think is key, and that's going to be really hard to stop, because you're going from not having to worry about trapping Giannis, which, again, easier said than done, but the Miami Heat achieved that last year. But now, once he gets trapped in the paint, which is his bread and butter, that's where his money is made, as he's probably the greatest within inside 3 feet, 5 feet of the hoop, one of the greatest players of all time, efficiency-wise. Once he passes that out, you got to have some dominating defense on guys like Holiday. That's the key for me. So I could see Milwaukee winning this in 7. I could also see the Heat winning this in 7. I'll pin it in as a Milwaukee victory. Again, I think that they've built themselves up a really good team that should be able to overcome this Miami Heat team, who has been injured all year round, who has been out with COVID all year round, and has not really – another thing that comes with that is building consistency as a unit. While the unit is pretty much the same, they had no break time being in the finals last year to when the season started. They were another one of those teams who I believe suffered as much as they did with injury because they really had no offseason to get their legs back underneath them. They had some of the shortest time with the Lakers as well, being in the bubble so long, not being able to gain your health back, and that's why they got hurt as bad as they did early on in the season, because Jimmy Butler, he played 5 games before getting hurt. So now they've built some consistency like you talked about. They've been great in the month of May. They've been pretty much great in the month of April. It's going to be a tough feat for Milwaukee. You could honestly pick either one of these teams, and there's really no argument, or it's a really tough argument to favor one team versus the other. But I think that Jrue Holiday makes them such a better team than Eric Bledsoe did at the point guard last year. I think it elevates them to that next stature where they can overcome a 5-game series last year into a 7-game series win this year. So I think Milwaukee comes out with it.
Awesome. Well, one thing that you guys were able to avoid this year, because you decided to just embarrass my Boston Celtics towards the end of the year, was you guys avoided the NBA play-in tournament. My Celtics played in it last night, defeating the Wizards. Tonight we're going to see, two players that faced in the finals at one point. Now they're playing in the play-in tournament, which is kind of crazy to think about. But, I just have a couple questions, outside of the Miami Heat as we get ready for this postseason. Of course, we're going to look back in this first question. What are your thoughts on this, pre-NBA playoff tournament that we're seeing here in 2021?
A lot of people, Alec, were against it. A lot of people said it was dumb, but to be honest, from a viewer standpoint, and maybe that's because, obviously I'm not the athlete out there, and I'm not saying to myself, you play 72 games and one game and your whole season is over, which obviously sucks. That's not what basketball is about. That's in games like the MLB. That's in games like the NFL, which guys are used to. You have that mantra, you have that mindset going into the season that, hey, we want to avoid that wild card per se spot. With the NBA, while it stinks for the players, and we've seen guys, especially LeBron, advocate and say that's a bad thing, and now he's playing in the play-in, in which I think is going to be a showdown tonight against the Golden State Warriors. It's so entertaining because of the matchups that we're able to see. It's so entertaining in that sense. Outside of that Pacers game last night, which I couldn't have predicted, I don't think really anybody could have. Maybe you predicted that the Pacers were going to win, but by what, like 35 points, and the game was over.
That was awful.
It was awful. But the Boston game, listen, while it wasn't necessarily the closest of games, it was a great game from the standpoint of, I know a bunch of Celtics fans that already writ them off as soon as they matched up against the Wizards, saying that the game was over before the game even started, because essentially all you had out there was Jason Tatum. And you really saw that last night too, Alec. I don't know if you picked up on that, but they just got nobody. It's Jason Tatum out there. That's who they heavily rely on. And obviously, because he's your star, dropping 50 last night and solely carrying the team to a victory, but more entertaining of a game. And then you go to the Western Conference, you're seeing Golden State versus the Lakers. Memphis is playing San Antonio, which, again, kind of similar to the Pac teams, which means that it's going to be an interesting matchup. Going into the playoffs, something that I was looking forward to is at that point in time, the Pelicans were a team that were competing for a play-in spot. And to see Zion like on a one-on-one game against Steph Curry, or Zion against the Lakers, or Zion against Ja, that would have been a lot of fun to see. So from a viewer standpoint, it's an extra game. It's a lot of fun, do or die situation. From the athlete standpoint, I understand. But again, from my standpoint, just watching the game, it becomes so entertaining because that this game can ultimately end your season in which you worked all year round for.
All right, Kyle. Season or playoffs starting very soon. Before the official brackets are set, who do you have representing the East and the West in the NBA Finals?
So in the Eastern Conference, I have Brooklyn. Basketball is obviously a game of chemistry. We know this. But more often than not, the most talented team gets there. At least gets there. Maybe not win the finals, but usually the most talented team gets there. And we've seen, at least, I'm a New Yorker, so I've seen with my own two eyes, that Brooklyn, while they have their flaws, they have their weaknesses. They can't play interior defense. They really don't. Nick Claxton is a good center. DeAndre Jordan is a good center. But they're not stopping Giannis. You're not stopping Embiid. I mean, you got to live with that. You got to live with the fact that they'll probably drop 35, 40 points on you. The difference is Brooklyn from beyond the perimeter, and Kevin Durant, arguably the greatest shooter of all time, based on the fact that the guy can create his own shot like it's nothing, and there's nothing you can do about it because he stands at around 7 feet tall. So there's nothing you can do defensively to guard him. In terms of Kyrie, some of the best ball handling abilities of all time, to the point where he'll make you look silly on every single play. And James Harden, the ability to pull up from anywhere and still be a consistent and wow, that might be a shot that falls down because it just came out of James Harden's release. So while, yes, they're going to give up a lot of points to some of these star players, they'll drop 130, 140 on you if they have to. It just comes that easy. And in terms of the West becomes very hard, Alec. The West, I don't know about you, your take. I'd love to hear your take as well. The West is very hard because we see teams like Utah, we see teams like we see teams like the Suns, and to credit Monty Williams, winning Coach of the Year, turning the Suns into a reputable, good program organization, finally making the playoffs. But But realistically, how are these teams really the number 1 and number 2 if Anthony Davis and LeBron aren't hurt? Are they really the number 1 and number 2 if Kawhi and Paul George don't get hurt? Are they really the number 1, number 2 if Yusuf Nurkic and CJ McCollum don't miss time? If Jamal Murray on Denver doesn't miss time? Are they really as good as they are? Or are they the benefactor off the fact that their teams didn't get hit with the COVID bug? They would, outside of Donovan Mitchell in the last couple games of the season, Utah didn't get hurt. Are they really the number 1 or number 2 seeds? And now you break it down, the obvious choice would probably be the Lakers. But what are they going to be? Are they even going to make it out of this play-in game tonight? So for me, to be honest with you, I'm going to have to – it's so hard, man. It's so hard. I'm going to go with the Lakers. I'm still saying the Lakers because that's what I predicted in the beginning of the season. But it's much, much harder to predict the Western Conference just based on the fact that all those injuries, all those teams that have flaws, all those teams that kind of stand at the same standpoint, in my personal opinion, because of where they level right now. Like I said, Jamal Murray got hurt, but that hasn't stopped Jokic at all. I mean, he's still been a beast. They're still stacking up wins. But when it comes down to a finals matchup, which team do I think has the edge? It's the team that just came off the NBA Finals with LeBron James, arguably the best player in the game. With an Anthony Davis, when healthy, is one of the best big men in the game. So that's the team I'm going with, Brooklyn versus LA. But I'd love to hear your take on the West. I want to hear your take.
See, the thing is, I think you're spot on between Utah and Phoenix. I think their regular season stories are pretty awesome. You know, Utah 31-5 at home, Chris Paul taking Phoenix, an organization that's pretty much been laughed at the last few years, and turning them into a contender. If one of them played the Lakers, the other plays the Warriors, say hypothetically, you know, I think the Warriors are going to be a brutal matchup. Whoever they play, they can shoot Steph Curry in the playoffs. And LA, I mean, I think LA wins the series.
Yeah.
So, you know, I like Denver. I wish Jamal Murray wasn't hurt. I think Kawhi Leonard in the playoffs, if they start, I mean, I just don't know what to think of the Clippers because I think they have all the pieces.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing it. You know, Dallas and Portland are good, but I'm not really penciling them in. Personally, I would love to see LA play LA. And obviously this could be depending on seeding. That can change in a conference finals. My God. I mean, I think if Utah avoids the Lakers, I think Utah's a very good team. I think they're very good at home. I think that helps in a series. I just don't think they'll go to a conference finals and win it. That's
the thing, though, Alec. Don't they? If the Lakers win tonight, right? Don't they move on to play Utah in like the first round?
No, they move on to play the Suns.
Oh, they play the second seed, not the first seed. Okay.
So I think the Suns would lose that matchup. I think the Suns' backcourt is great, but they're not stopping LeBron and AD in the first round, 7 games. Sorry, Chris Paul, what you did is amazing.
Yeah.
Good for you for leading this team. But
I mean,
again, in the playoff moment, you can't count them out.
I don't know if you saw it. I think it was end of April, time in May when Anthony Davis came back. His sticking point game was after the injury, dropped like 45 on DeAndre Ayton. They couldn't stop him. They couldn't stop him. And that was without LeBron too. So
yeah. So it'll be interesting. I would love to see, you know, Kawhi turn it around, like, you know, take over the games like he did when he was in Toronto. I'm not seeing everything come together. Like, you know, even though in Toronto he was the main guy, some of the role players were playing awesome. You know, I'm just not seeing it coming together at the right time. I hate to absolutely agree with you. I was kind of hoping you wouldn't pick the Lakers. I'm not surprised you picked the Nets. I feel like a lot of people are picking the Nets because I think when they go into a series against a Philadelphia or a Milwaukee, I think they will come out on top. But I hope the Western Conference is absolute chaos this year. Like, I hope this is like an NCAA tournament thing where after the first round, you just take your bracket and you're just like, well, I'm screwed. I'm not winning this one this year. So I hate to agree with you, but I do think it's going to be the Lakers. I think we need to see a Kyrie LeBron finals.
Yeah.
Health will be big because obviously we've seen, lineup changes with both those teams pretty much all season. But damn, I was hoping we'd have some disagreements here. But I do agree with you. I think if the Lakers come out, I see the Lakers Jazz series would be awesome. I don't think the Lakers lose tonight, though.
I don't think they do either. I think it'd be a really good series. Again, for me, I guess to throw a knot in the chain here to the opposing point, my other team that I would really look out for is that if Milwaukee does beat the Heat, I think that they could represent the Eastern Conference. I really do. I to be honest with you, as good as Brooklyn is, as good as Philadelphia is, Milwaukee's toughest matchup, in my personal opinion, is the Miami Heat because they match up so well with them. They don't do that with the other teams. The other teams don't match well with the Bucks. Whereas you saw earlier in the season, I think it was back-to-back games, and yes, James Harden was out. Giannis killed them. They beat him both games, and they were at Brooklyn both of those games. Same thing with the Sixers. While I think that Embiid has built himself up to that MVP level, while I think that Doc Rivers is a tremendous upgrade over Brett Brown, while they finally have gotten some shooters on that team, again, Tobias Harris has been great this season as well. When it comes down to it, these series matter. It comes down to the stars on your team. And if you're taking Milwaukee stars and you're taking Philadelphia stars, while I think that Giannis and Embiid are on the same level, I think that Ben Simmons not being a shooter, while he is a phenomenal defender, that puts them at a worse situation than they would be if he was able to shoot the basketball frequently and more consistently. I think that puts them at a lesson point. So to disagree with my own point, I guess you'd say, I would say Milwaukee would have the second best odds, in my personal opinion, to represent the Eastern Conference.
See, if Milwaukee goes 7 games in a physical series against the Heat, I don't think they're beating the Nets because I think the Nets are going to smoke the Celtics. They're going to be a bit more rested. Plus, you talk about star versus star. They got 3 guys that can match Giannis.
Yeah. I mean, they do. But again, like I said earlier, Giannis, took care of business. And while I think that defensively, but they match up so nicely with them, right? You put Durant, you put Giannis on Durant. You know that Durant can't guard Giannis. You have Holiday and Middleton on either Kyrie or James Harden, which is probably 2 of the best guard matchups that you could have against either one of those players in terms of team matchups situations. So, and then it comes down to bench depth and what they're bringing to the table, whether you have Joe Harris on the Nets, whether you have Bryn Forbes, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton on the Bucks. It comes down to what those other role players do for you. Dante DiVincenzo as well as evolved as a nice player in this league. I think that that's another 7-game series, but agreed with the point that if it is a gritty series against the Heat, they definitely could be beat up and tired by the time they get to a team like Brooklyn.
So, Kyle, before I let you go, man, where can my listeners find you on social media, listen to your podcast, tune into your live shows? Tell us all where they can find you.
So you can follow me at Kyle Russo 612 on Instagram. Not really a fan of Twitter, so that's really the main go-to to get me. Obviously, follow me on Facebook as well. Kyle Russo, search me up. On Review and Preview Sports, at Review and Preview Sports. Make sure to follow. Facebook Live show. We have 3 shows on the platform at this moment in time. 3&D podcast on Monday, Review and Preview, the main show on Tuesday, and now hitting for the cycle on Thursday nights. And then as well on JDF Sports, co-host of Buckets with Zach Besaw and Justin Kearns every Wednesday night tonight, starting live at 7 o'clock to 8:30 every Wednesday night, talking some NBA hoop. Really great discussion as always. And then that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to join me, man. That was awesome.
Absolutely, Alec. Anytime.
All right, well, that's going to be it for this episode of the Alec Walt Show. I'm Alec Walt alongside Kyle Russo. What do you think of the Miami Heat in the postseason here in 2021? Feel free to comment that below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Down the Block Sports for more of my exclusive content. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon.